Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulil kareem amma ba'du. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back. Yes, I've changed. Maulana Qasim Saab has now handed over the reins for the remainder of today's program onto me. I will be joined shortly by Allama Maulana Thamiruddin Saab, inshallah ta'ala. He's just taking a well-earned break. What I'm going to speak to you about is the presentation to go over the whole process of moon sighting and some of the issues which the ulama spoke about just before I appeared on your screens. So if we start the presentation, inshallah, and the whole purpose of this is to explain to you about, I hope you can see that on your screens now, is the fiqh of moon sighting. Like everything else, there is a system both from the Sharia, which explains it, and that will be broken down into fiqh and into the science. So we're going to explore both areas. So just to give you an overview of today's lecture, the first thing we're going to speak about is the importance of moon sighting. And that should be the first slide you can see there. So this is the first area. And we will speak about why is moon sighting an important topic? Why should we be talking about it? Why have we dedicated much of today? In fact, myself and my colleagues, we have been involved in moon sighting discussions, in particular just today from this morning. So, and these conversations have been ongoing. So that's the first thing. We're then going to explore the basis of moon sighting in terms of what is moon sighting based upon. We've spoke about the ayat of the Quran. We spoke about the AHADITH. So they will give us some time to explore that. And that's the next area, is understanding the AHADITH. You will see that it seems that the AHADITH are somewhat contrary. And we need to explore that as to how do we do what's called tatbiq. How do we reconcile between these AHADITH? The fourth area that we will look at is the astronomical data. What astronomical data exists? What astronomical data are we allowed to use? What are we allowed to use? And then we will explore the situation in the United Kingdom. Why is United Kingdom so unique? We see, for example, in Pakistan and in other countries, they take their own sighting from their own countries. Morocco is another example, South Africa. Why is it that the UK has to rely on sighting from outside its country, outside its borders? So then we ask the question, what role does astronomy play? And inshallah ta'ala, we will aim to give you some responses to that. But we also want this to be educational as well as something that should bring about some action, some activism. So we will explore what is next after that. And as Imam Qasim said just before the break, you may have some questions, and I think the lines will be open, which is on 01274 214 299. So if you have any questions from what has been spoken about so far, then please feel free to call in after the presentation is finished and we've reached that particular point. So let's turn our attention now to the importance of moon sighting. Okay, so in terms of the importance of moon sighting, we know that there are some months in the Islamic calendar which have ibadat, acts of worship. We're speaking about, for instance, Muharram, which is literally 2-3 days away from us now, where we have the 9th and 10th of Muharram, that we fast on those particular days. We also have the 15th of Sha'ban, which is now past us, but is approaching us in the next year of 1443. But more importantly also, we have obviously Ramadan, both the beginning of Ramadan and then the end of Ramadan by the beginning of Shawwal. But there are other matters as well, not just when it comes to ibadat. There are, for example, the issues of bulugh and iddah. So there are matters that we also need to be aware of from a fiqh perspective. But I must also point out that we should be looking at fasting on all, apart from Dhul Hijjah, on the 13th, 14th and 15th of the month. These are referred to as the Ayyamu Bidh. Now when we do not know when the month started, how will we know when the Ayyamu Bidh are? So I hope in those few points I've clarified that the importance of moon sighting is clear. Let's now look at the ahadith that exist. So what I've done is I've gathered the hadith together. The first hadith you will find in Bukhari, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan of Tirmidhi, Sunan Nasai, and also you will find in Sahih Ahmad. The hadith which has been narrated by the ulama just before the break is Sumu li ru'yatihi وَأَفْتِرُوا لِرُؤْيَتِهِ فَإِنْ غُمِّيَ عَلَيْكُمُ الشَّهْرِ فَعُدُّوا ثَلَاثِينَ. That sumu is an imperative here. It's an order. The fast لِرُؤْيَتِهِ. Now lam is coming here for illa. Yani what is the basis of this fasting? What is it based upon? So fast لِرُؤْيَتِهِ. Yani based on its sighting. وَأَفْتِرُوا لِرُؤْيَتِهِ. And stop fasting. Yani celebrate Eid al-Fitr upon its sighting. Yani the sighting of the month of Shawwal, the hilal of Shawwal. فَإِنْ غُمِّيَ عَلَيْكُمُ الشَّهْرِ فَعُدُّوا ثَلَاثِينَ. And if this is being difficult for you to sight, for example, there's clouds in the sky or some other reason which does not allow you to sight it, فَعُدُّوا ثَلَاثِينَ, then count 30 days. Now we heard some people, the ulama mentioned just before the interval, that there are some groups in, say, North America rather, who say that the word ru'ya here means not to actually visibly sight, but the word ru'ya means here to calculate. That you do not need to sight the moon itself, that you can actually calculate the moon. However, that would not make sense. The reason why that would not make sense, and in fact, before I go on to why it wouldn't make sense, they use ayats of the Quran, like for example, Surah Al-Fil, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and he says, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. That did you not see how your Rabb dealt with the people of the elephants? So they argue that the Prophet ﷺ was born in the year of the elephants. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say to him, did you not see what we did with the people of the elephants? So this seeing is also ilm, yani the ilm of knowing, not necessarily the sighting, the actual sighting. However, that would fit there. It does not fit here because the second part of the hadith says, فَإِنْ غُمِّيَ عَلَيْكُمُ الشَّهْرِ فَعُدُّوا ثَلَاثِينَ. That if it is not possible to sight it, if it is clouded for you, then count 30. Now, how would it be clouded for you if you're using calculation? It would not be clouded. You would always be able to know through calculation whether the month is 29 days or whether the month is 30 days. There would be no need for you to say, there would be no need in the hadith, فَإِنْ غُمِّيَ. فَإِنْ, in means if. And if is shartiya. Shartiya means that there may be a condition that isn't there all the time, but whenever the condition comes in, then what you would do, fa then comes in to give as its jaza. Then fa'uddu thalathin, then in those circumstances, when you do not sight the moon, you will count 30. So that's the first hadith that I wanted to share with you with regards to the basis of moon sighting. The second hadith, in which this has been narrated by Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, and Imam Abu Dawood, and also is mentioned, collates the hadith, in which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, لا تقدموا الشهر بالصيام يوم ولا يومين إلا أن يكون شيء يصومه أحدكم ولا تصوموا حتى تروه ثم صوموا حتى تروه فإن حال دونه غمامة فأتموا العدة 30 ثم أفطروا والشهر 29. That the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, do not precede the month. Yani, ash-shahra here is referring to the month of Ramadan. Do not precede the month by fasting for a day or fasting for 2 days. These are referred to as Yawm shak or Ayyam shak. Yani, shak meaning that when the person is not sure, that, you know what, I'm going to bet on the safe side, and I don't know when Ramadan is going to start, so I will fast a day before Ramadan starts just to be on the safe side. So this person is trying to preempt Ramadan and not miss Ramadan, so they fast potentially on the 30th of Shawwal, and in some cases the 29th of Shawwal, in order to ensure that khudana khasta, if we've made an error, that I will catch Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ actually makes it quite clear, in which he says, لا تقدموا الشهر بصيام يوم ولا يومين. Do not precede the month of Ramadan by a fast or 2 fasts, or إلا أن يكون شيء يصومه أحدكم, except if this is a habit of yours, that is so it happens to fall on Wednesday and Thursday, and you fast on Wednesday and Thursday. ولا تصوموا حتى تروه. But do not fast until you see it. So the sighting of it is essential. ثم صوموا, then fast, حتى تروه, until you see it. فإن حال دونه غمامة. So if some cloud or some coverage comes in front of you, فأتموا العدة 30, then complete 30 days. ثم أفطروا والشهر 29. Then you break your fast. ثم أفطروا, yani you celebrate Eid al-Fitr, and a month can be 29 days. So we know here that the Prophet ﷺ is explaining that there's no harm if a month is 29 days, because there's a possibility for it. So there we can see two hadith which categorically stress sighting, that sighting is absolutely essential, that to go out and attempt to sight the moon is essential. We have another hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says, Inna ummatun ummiyya, that indeed we as a community are ummiyya. Ummiyya referring here is that we are unlettered. Okay, we do not have expertise in writing, in literacy, in numeracy. La naktubu wa la nahsibu. We don't write, nor do we calculate. Ash-shahru hakadha wa hakadha. A month can be such and such and such and such. Meaning, يعني مرة 29, sometimes it can be 29 days, ومرة 30, and sometimes it can be 30 days. This hadith is collated by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. This hadith is sometimes used by individuals who say this is clear that we are not permitted to use any form of astronomical data, because the Prophet ﷺ says, La naktubu wa la nahsibu. But we're going to explore that shortly, inshallah. So let's try to understand the ahadith on the next slide. So are we allowed to use astronomical data? Is this something permissible for us? Well, as you can imagine, in most cases, we have two extreme positions. One party will say that you cannot use astronomical data whatsoever. Their argument is, Inna ummatun ummiya la naktabu wa la nahsibu. They will say that we are an unlettered nation, we do not write, we do not have literacy, nor do we have numeracy. That would be their opinion. The other extreme is that no, we can use astronomical data and we don't even need to cite. In fact, what we should do is just use astronomical data all the time. Forget citing. We have no need to look at citing. So where do we currently use data? Do we take a view that we do not use any form of astronomical data whatsoever? But we've already heard that we use astronomical data to determine sunrise and sunset. We use astronomical data to determine dawn. So astronomical data is being used to determine the end of suhoor and the beginning of the fast. Astronomical data is being used to talk about sunrise, that salah becomes impermissible. Astronomical data is being used for zawal. And for maghrib, the astronomical data of sunset is being used. And if we get into the Isha time, then the twilights, whether nautical twilight or astronomical twilight, that's used for determining Isha Salah. So clearly we currently use astronomical data. And when we look at the hadith which says, La naktubu wa la nahsibu, then look at us as a nation. We have to calculate zakah. Zakah is a complicated thing, 2.5% when you're looking at different animals in terms of if you had sheep, how many sheep you would take out for giving zakah. Similarly, when you're working out mirath, inheritance, and you're working out that the person gets a quarter, but he's got children, so they'll get an eighth, the parent gets a sixth, but this person will get 2/3. You know, we all know, those of us who've studied mirath classes, that if you don't have maths as a strong point, then you really struggle in mirath. How is it that we don't la nahsibu in that sense? What is that? It doesn't make sense because we are clearly using calculations. So what did the Prophet ﷺ mean by that? Because here we're clearly using calculations. Similarly, literacy. We saw, for example, the Muslim community, particularly in the golden age, using literacy all the time, writing things down. In fact, we gave so much to the world through astronomy, mathematics, through our medicinal advances, and this was all because of the application of literacy and numeracy and the science associated. Therefore, when the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna ummatun ummiya la naktabu la nahsibu, he was not referring that this is this is a preferred position. He was saying that this is our approach when it comes to moon sighting, is that we base it upon shahada. But that is not absolute, and we will get to understanding how does shahada work. So for instance, if somebody walked in right now and said that, oh, it is Fajr time, would we accept that statement? They are saying it is Fajr time. Do we accept that statement? So this is an area that we need to explore, that when it comes to witness statements, shahada, do we just take them on face value? Do we explore? Because we hear from certain countries reports being made of shahada in which we're not sure where that's coming from. So let's look at the astronomical data, and some of this data Maulana Thamiruddin Sahab has already shared with you, and I will be sharing some of his data with you as well, inshallah. So when we look at the crescent visibility curves, the CVPC, and we have various data that's already exists. So whether that be from Yallop or Oda or Colwell and Laney, you can see that these individuals gather data together from various places, from various sighting points, and then produced their results. And when they produced their results, they included all these. So these are, and it's essential that we look at that word when it talks about predictability. Sometimes I think people misunderstand this term and they think that this becomes yaqini. All this is a tool that could be potentially used. So when we look at these, now when I say 295 first sightings, Bernard Yallop, a scientist, what he did was he looked at Hilal sightings, he gathered the data, and he then made algorithms in order to predict any future sightings. Similarly did Ouda and also Colwell and Laney, and they've got different amount of data points. Here we see on the next slide about the astronomical data and what we look at in terms of the visibility criteria variables. So when we look at the visibility criteria variables, we can see that there's things like moon age time, or moon's age rather. So when we speak about the moon's age, this is the time between conjunction and the time of observation. Now this is important, okay, and I'm going to keep this relatively simple so that you don't necessarily need to have a degree in physics or anything like that, or any passion towards astronomy. So in a very basic sense, it denotes the size of the moon. Because as the moon gets older, it gets bigger. And when we mean by it gets bigger, what we're saying here obviously is that the earth is not in conjunction anymore with it, and therefore some of the light from the sun is now being reflected from the surface of the moon. And as the moon ages, it moves further away from conjunction, and therefore more light is reflected. So the hilal, the thin crescent, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's an important variable that we need to understand. The second one that we need to understand is something called the moon's lag time. So this is also essential. The lag time is the time between sunset and moonset. Now it's quite obvious that it is difficult to see the moon when the sun is out, because the brightness of the sun is brighter than the reflection of the sun's light from the moon's surface. So when the sun is out, it's difficult to see the moon. So we have to wait for the sun to set. But because the moon appears on the same horizon where the sun is setting, it again becomes difficult to see even if the sun has set. We have to wait for some considerable time for the sun to disappear beneath the horizon in order to be able to see the moon. So this moon lag time is also essential. The longer the moon lag time, the more likely it is to see the moon. The shorter the moon lag time is, the less likely it is to see the moon. The ARCL is the angular separation, and some of you may have heard of the Danjon's limit of 7 degrees. And this again, there is a view, and recent research suggests 5 degrees, that under a certain elongation, the hilal will not be sighted. And this is, decades, if not centuries worth of data that's been looked at. And then we get the DAZ, which is the relative azimuth, which speaks about angular difference, and then the crescent width. I put all that together in a nice little diagram, which should appear on your screens shortly, which is the next slide. There it is. Okay, so you can see all that information now. So you can see the ARCL, you can see the ACRV, you can see the DAZ, and you can see the horizon. Okay, so they're clear to see. Now let's put all that together in the CVPC. So if we move on to the next slide, these were the colors which Maulana Thamiruddin Sahab was trying to show and demonstrate, and the various colors we got. This one, I know these are a bit different, because this was the first time I delivered this presentation, and I've not gone and changed these slides since. You know, as they say, what's not broken, don't fix. So therefore, I've used the very same ones. This is Jamadul Akhira of 1439, and this is using the Yallop criterion. So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner box, you'll see that red is impossible, no color is not possible, blue needs optical aid, magenta may need optical aid, and yellow is referring to naked eye at perfect conditions. And green is easily visible by the naked eye. So you can see that apart from in the Atlantic Ocean and in the States itself, it is not possible, obviously, to sight the moon. So if anybody made a declaration in Australia, or any made a declaration in India, or anywhere, for example, in the Caucasus or in Russia, then the scientific data is saying that it's not possible to do so due to that data, due to that information I shared with you. Let's move on to the next one, which is using the other criterion. This is the SAAO criterion. And in this case, again, it's the same month. And but again, if you look in the bottom right-hand side box, you'll see the various details. But the overall conclusion is no different. It looks the same. Okay? And let's move on to the third slide. Okay? This one is using Auda's research. And you can see again, this is referring to 2018. And we now look at the same month, and now the colors are slightly different. Is the next slide, please? The one after this? That's the one, yeah. So that's the slide we're looking at right now. So you can see, for instance, that red is impossible, no color is not possible, blue needs optical aid, magenta can be seen by the naked eye, green easily visible, and therefore, again, you're seeing the same. So if we got reports from any other part of the world, then we would question that witness statement to determine whether that has been an accurate sighting. However, if you look at limitations of CVPC, which is the next slide, these are just a rule of thumb. It is not categorical, it is not absolute. Okay, so Yallop band D, for example, only by assisted eyes, it was possible to see that even in that circumstances without assisted eyes. Next one, Auda band C, only by assisted eyes. Again, you can see that it was possible to sight the moon without the use of binoculars, even though the CVPC said that you would require binoculars. So you can see the age of the moon, and you can see the lag time, and there's the ARCL. These were the things I spoke to you about, and these are key indicators of the possibility of sighting the moon. The older moon, you can see, 16 hours old moon, is the youngest that's been seen there. Lag time, you're talking about 30 odd minutes, and an ARCL of a minimum of 7.5 degrees. So these are key indicators to let a person know whether that moon can be sighted. Now, obviously what you're gathering here is important information about understanding the circumstance. And I know it's technical, and it's supposed to be technical because it's not something that anyone can just understand. It has to be left to the expertise. Let's move on to the next one, which is the United Kingdom situation. And that would be that this, at the moment, is highly improbable to sight the moon, even though there's a lot of work going on to try to overcome this. And as a result, there may be a problem if one acted on 30 days in each circumstances, because it would be that we would end up with longer days. Now, there is work ongoing with local sighting to try to come to an understanding and see if there's always a case where we can sight the moon. The more people go out to try to sight the crescent, this will increase the probability. Unfortunately, at the moment, because we've all given up on local sighting and we just wait on news from abroad, then we have low figures at the moment. So we need to spend more time going out and trying to sight the moon. So what are all the alternatives? So let's move on to the next slide. On the next slide, what we have in a Muslim country is we have a qadi or a shura. So what we have in a Muslim country is we have a state or a department which declares the sighting of the moon. In the UK, what we don't have is that system. So we have a board of ulama that act in that particular way. And then we have a legally sound system in place. there needs to be an agreement there in between wherever the foreign news has been borrowed between and the UK communities. There also has to be a legally sound system for the transfer of the ruling. And the whichever declaration committee that exists, they need to be making moon sighting declarations. The UK Moon Sighting Committee should be independent. Now, what this is that wherever you're getting your news from, whether you are a masjid or whether you are a member of the community, you need to make sure that your news is coming through this system. If it doesn't come through this system, then it is problematic. So next slide, what role does astronomy play? Now we can see that this key data can be accepted as near to fact as possible. For instance, moonrise, moonset, sunset, ACRL, age of moon. These are virtually fact now, virtually fact. Like we don't wait for the sun to set, we go by our watches or clocks. We know that Maghrib, according to the timetable, is X time. We know that from the astronomical data, and we pray Maghrib Salah. We don't think that maybe Khuda na khasa they made a mistake, let's wait for the sun to set. Even though it's so easy to see the sunset, especially on a summer's day where there's lack of clouds, it's so easy to see the sun. We don't. We go straight to our Salah timetable. Similarly, moonset is no different. If we accept sunset, why don't we accept moonset? You know, there's two celestial bodies that are moving. So there are things which are factual, and there's others which aren't, and therefore we can't say it's absolute. So that's why if you look at this, the word CVPC is crescent visibility predictability curves. Okay? So they are a rule of thumb rather than factual. They can assist, but they're not determine. So what we've done here on the next slide is we've come up with a structure of what can be acceptable and what can't be acceptable. So if somebody comes forward with a declaration when the moon has set before the sun, so if we have a look at the slide. So if somebody comes forward and says, I've sighted the hilal, I've sighted the moon, but we know that the moon had set before the sun, then that is impossible. We can reject that shahada. Secondly, is that if somebody comes forward and says that the moon was seen, the hilal was seen, this time the moon set took place after sunset, but below what was called imkana ru'ya. Then obviously this we would consider to be highly improbable. Finally, there is a set level of criteria which has been established, which means of imkani ru'ya, and that means it is possible. Now, what is imkani ru'ya? That is based on certain variables which I've already shared with you. So let's look at the process next before we invite Maulana Thamiyuddin Sahab back so we can get him to explain his slides. So the first place is the process, and in the process, what exists at the moment is Wifaqul Ulama have a global network in which they are connected to all the various moon sighting committees from Australia all the way to South America and the US. So we have a system in which we're all communicating with each other. So as soon as a moon has been sighted, a declaration is made, or as soon as the moon has not been sighted, a declaration has been made, and then throughout the country, throughout the world, depending on which part of the world is, that declaration comes forward. So when we look at the UK crescent, and then in the UK, we have individuals who are out there on a monthly basis trying to sight the hilal and sending and sharing that news with everybody, with the ulama, so the ulama can make a decision. Finally, we move on to the European partners that exist, in which that information can also be collated from there. So as we move on to the next slide, in terms of forming a consensus, which is an area that we're moving on to now. So we know, for example, the first point of call for Wifaqul Ulama is the UK declaration. Following on from that, if there is no positive sighting from the UK, is to turn to Morocco and also to South Africa. That is the current criterion. It is also working closely with various other moon declaration organizations. For instance, BMSC, the Rochdale Council of Mosques, Minab, New TV, Takbir TV, and Iqra TV as well. These are conversations which have all gone. So finally, before we take a short break, in which we will then call Maulana Samiruddin Sahab as well, last sort of couple of slides. So what conclusions do we have? The conclusions that we have is that without any doubt, sighting is given priority as dictated by the scriptural evidence. That is absolutely essential without any shadow of doubt. The astronomy that is used is only used to reject sightings when the moon sets before the sun. So it is not that astronomy is given precedence. The sighting is given precedence. But like we can assess witnesses, we can in various other form of shahada, we can also assess these witnesses. Astronomy utilized to interrogate sightings during highly improbable and if not supported via our global network, then rejection is recommended. Astronomy then is utilized to support the witness statements and as a result in order to make a declaration. So finally, the last slide before we take a short break is what next? Okay, what should we be doing next? Well, Wifaq Ulama announced UK moon sighting on a monthly basis. Sighting is given priority. We ensure that sightings which are impossible are eradicated before declaration is made. Due diligence and thorough process when moon sighting is in highly improbable zone. And each masjid committee needs to explore how they determine any new month. So that's what I wanted to present now. So what we're going to do now, inshallah ta'ala, is give you a little bit of time to absorb that. Once you've absorbed that, what we will be doing is opening up the lines after we return from our short break for any questions that you may have. Also, what we will do is any of the information that Maulana Samiruddin Sahab wanted to share with you, then we will also be able to share them. And I can see that one or two other people have made it to the studio, so we may be able to bring them to the fore as well, inshallah. So I think there was enough there for you to get your teeth into. So I hope it's not been too much, but as you can hopefully see, that this is quite a lot of work and it's quite in-depth and it's quite technical. And it's something that needs to be obviously left to experts, but it's everybody's responsibility to raise awareness and bring about that change. So inshallah ta'ala, I will let you be for a few minutes so that you may go for a short break. And then we will join again shortly with a couple of new panelists, inshallah. So jazakumullah khairan for listening. We will see you again soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.